Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to class today. Thanks for joining me, whether you're watching live or you're watching the recording. I just appreciate you watching. Today we're going to cover the last little bit of what we need to cover for Module 3, which we're going to talk about using joins to connect two different tables together. So we can kind of connect two different tables together and use information or use data from two different tables to give us information. We'll also do some sample queries to kind of make us even better prepared to be able to do our lab assignments that are due this week. Before we do that, a couple of announcements. I don't know right off the top of my head if any of you are interested in the esports or have signed up for the esports. If you have, be on the lookout for an email from me this week. If you don't know, I am the faculty advisor for the gaming club / esports here at the college. If you've signed up for the interest form, you're on my mailing list for that. I've been working on the Discord server, specifically a Discord bot, all morning. So we should have a Discord for that being sent out to the mailing list this week, so be on the lookout for that. I've also got some events that I'm planning coming up for that as well, which is pretty exciting. Also, a big thing as we're kind of getting closer to, I believe the 24th is when registration for spring opens up, which means that Advising Day is upon us again. Tomorrow is our Advising Day here for IT programs. Academic Advising Day for IT programs is tomorrow, 11 o'clock a.m., room 2050. So if you want to come to Advising Day, stop by room 2050. I'll be there. Miss Randall will be there. Mr. Cobb will be there. I believe we also might have some of our advisors and things like that there. To help get you ready for spring, especially for most of you, that becomes really important because this should all be your, or this should be, at least for most of you all, your final year. So getting your, making sure you're getting everything that you need, making sure that you have everything in order so that you can graduate on time and get your degree and everybody's happy and everybody gets what they need is exactly what we want to do here. So you want to make sure that you are getting everything you need there. If you're unable to come to Advising Day tomorrow at 11 o'clock a.m. in room 2050 in the Jack Hunt Campus Center here at Cleveland Community College, just contact one of us. Contact me. Ideally, if you're in this class, you'd be talking to me, right? I'd be the best one to help you determine what you need in the spring for my programming and web development people. What you're primarily going to need for the spring is you're going to need Web 285, CSC 151, which is the Java class, Web 214, if you haven't taken it yet, which is the social media class, Web 225, the content management systems class, if you haven't taken that yet, and I know there's Web 287, the ePortfolio class that's been thrown in there. One or two other classes that's in there that you need to take. You just want to make sure that you get everything that you need so that you know what you need for the spring. So a couple big announcements right off the jump. That's tomorrow, 11 a.m. So today we're talking about using joins in MySQL, and what a join allows us to do is it allows us to take two tables and put them together so that we can use the information on these two tables together. Right? So when we think about a relational database, just to kind of refresh our memories just a little bit, a relational database consists of multiple related tables. When we look at these tables, right, we've talked about them previously. Right, one of the things that we said that we do is we sort of take these tables and we put like information in these tables. And then, you know, if we have another set of information that's a group together of information, then we want to put it in its own table, right? If it's kind of related but different from the other information that's in this other table, it needs to get its own table. But it is related to the information that's in that other table. So all of this information, even though it's in different tables and it's kind of different from one another, it's still related in some way. So we have to be able to relate these tables together and work with these tables together in order to be able to actually get the full impact of the information from these tables. And so when we are using these tables together, we are able to link these tables together using common columns. Right? And we've kind of seen that before as we've worked through this, right? Like if we look in our databases that we've been using, and for example, we look in the players table, and we'll just run a select star from players here. Right, we can see we get all the information back from our players. Oh, first time I'm using it today. Let's run a use players. Or use tennis, rather, not players. This table is called tennis. This database is called tennis. And so you can see the content here that we're dealing with in this players table that's in our tennis database. Right, you can see I have the player number, the name, the initials, so on and so forth. Right. Well, let's compare that side by side with, let's say, the penalties table. So let's say select star from penalties. So now we see here in the penalties table, I have a primary key in the penalties table, right, which is the player number. Or which is the payment number, rather. In the penalties table here, my primary key is the payment number, because that is my value here that's going to be a unique value for every single record that's in this penalties table. But I also have this player number here. Right? So when I think about, well, how would I know, looking at this table, how would I know the name of the person that incurred these penalties? Because when I look at these penalties, I see a player number, but I don't see the name. Well, the name is in the players table, right? So we look here, we have the name here in the players table, and we have in the penalties table, we have the payments for the different penalties. And we have this player number category here, this player number column. And this player number column is our relational point. It is the column of consistent information that we can relate these two tables on. In this instance, this would be our foreign key, or FK, in this penalties table. Right? Because it is the relational point, it is the key that I can use to relate back to the players table. So I can take information from the penalties table and relay it back to information from the players table and relate it back on this idea that the player numbers are consistent between the two tables. So if I wanted to know the name, or I wanted to know the address, or I wanted to know something like that on who had payment number 5, even though I don't have that information in this table, I could use my other tables that I have here with me to be able to get that information and work with that information, right? So just because we have this limited set of information in this particular table, it doesn't mean we are just limited to the information that's in this table, right? We have all sorts of information that we can deal with here. And so that's really what we're looking at when we're looking at these items. And so the way that I like to relate tables together is I like to use a join. And there are subqueries that we can do with any's and all's. And I didn't even bother looking at those in our last live stream, right? In your reading, it discusses these subqueries. I don't even particularly like using those subqueries because I think they're too convoluted, right? I think they're too extra. I particularly prefer using a join. And so with a join, we can use multiple tables. We can link these multiple tables together. And I can link them together based on the values of their foreign keys. And so that foreign key becomes my relational point. It becomes my joining point. And so I have to make sure that I have this relational point, this point where I can relate the two tables, where the information is consistent across the two tables. Now, there are different types of joins that we can use in MySQL. MySQL supports a cross join, which is a full union. We'll see some examples of that in just a bit. A cross join, not really useful for most applications, right? Because it gives you, it kind of mixes up and jumbles up the data. The inner join, which is the default, which is the most used. The left join and the right join. And we'll see some examples of some of these as we kind of progress here. So, like, let's look at an example of a cross join here. And so, as you can see here, like, this is an example of a cross join or a cross join chart, and you can kind of see here why it's not exceptionally useful. Right, the hatching in this instance is demonstrating a relational point. Right, like 1 and 1 really doesn't have a relationship to A, B, or C. 2 relates to A, 3 relates to B. C doesn't have anything that relates to it in the first table. Right, but with our cross join, we are actually doing this full join where our output here is actually giving us an output of everything with everything from the first table, which is why it's not incredibly useful. It kind of takes all of our data and jumbles it together and kind of smushes it all together to where if it was related or not, it kind of puts it all together, which is why it really isn't very useful, as we can see here. So we're going to kind of take our cross join and we're going to kind of throw it out. So these are our other joins, and these are kind of how we use them. Right, we can see our examples of our left joins, our right joins, our inner joins, which is our, our default there. Right, and so we can see, for example, with our left join, we have tables A and B. when we are left joining, it gives us everything from table A and the overlapping material from table B. Right, so it's everything from table A and the overlapping material from table B. Right, the thing that is the most useful to us, which is the inner join, which is just the overlapping material from both tables A and B. Which means if it doesn't overlap between the two tables, it is discarded. And then the right join, which is the overlapping material from table A and all of the material from table B. And you can kind of see underneath these the examples here of how we're kind of doing these joins. But I think it's more useful to us to just do some examples with these, right, to see them in action. So let's look at our players in our penalties table here. So what I would like to do is I would like to get, let's say we get every name and initials. So let's go first initials, last name, and payment number and payment amount. Now there is one thing that we have to do here that we want to be more kind of cautious about. And that's we want to be specific about where we are getting data from. When we're using multiple tables, we want to be more specific about which tables we want to be getting that data from. So for example, I'm going to say select, right, like we always would. And I'm going to go ahead and delete these. I'm going to say select players dot initials. So instead of just initials, in this case, right, like we've been doing in the past weeks, we might just write initials here. In this case, I'm going to write players dot initials because I want to be more specific about which table contains initials that I want to grab. Right, so players dot initials, players dot name. And if I want to be more specific here, I can add some aliases here. So players dot initials as first initial, players dot name as last name. Right, now let's get some information from our penalties table. So let's get penalties.payment number, penalties.payment number, and let's get that as, we'll get it as penalty number. And then we'll get penalties dot amount as amount. All right, so players dot initials, right? So, because we're getting the first initials from the players table, right? So we're being more specific with where we're getting things from here. So we're getting all the stuff here. And so we're just going to say from players. But we're not just going to get it from players. We're also going to join penalties. So from players, join penalties. We're going to, and if we join something, right, we're going to have something that is we're going to have a point where we are joining this thing on. Right? So our point where we're joining something on is our on. And in this case, it's easy, right? Because it's player number. So players.player number equals penalties.player number. So our on point here is players.player number equals penalties.player number. And I actually don't think we need those there. And if we want to add other statements to this, we can add them just like we were adding them previously. Right? It just changes the way we select slightly. Right? It goes back to kind of what we were saying last week, right? We're just kind of adding a little bit onto it. So if we run this, we execute this, we see our information here, right? We got our first initial, we got our last name, we get our penalty number, and we get our amount. And since we used our join here, this is just our inner join. So this is just where both tables overlap. If we change this to a left join, we will get all the information from our left table, which in this case is our players table. So it'll give us all the information from our players table. So it'll give us first initial and last name from everything, and only the penalties and amounts from where they overlap, which we can see that there. We have all these nulls here, right where they overlap. If we right join here, it will do the opposite. It will give us all the information from our penalties table, which in this case, since our penalties table is smaller and includes everything from the players table, this should look more like our inner join table. So we can see it here. Oh, it actually threw us an error there for that. Didn't like us using the right join there. So we're better off just using join. And of course, like, we can add more information here, right? And we can say where penalties dot amount greater than 50, right? 50.00 even. So now it's only going to give us the instances in which that condition is met. Right? Nothing really fundamentally changes here. The only thing that really changes are just kind of the slightly different puzzle pieces that we kind of put together here. And so that gives us the option of being able to take multiple tables and put them together. Let's do an example. Let me come up with one here. Tell you what, let's look at this teams table that we have here. Select star from teams. And let's look at that. Right, we have two teams. Team numbers 1 and 2. We have a player number. And I actually think I want the matches table here. I think that's what I want to be able to do this. Oh, yeah. Here we go. So let's try to do some things with our matches table and our players table here. Maybe even our teams table. Right, because we do have a team number here, a match number, player number. So let's say we wanted to get the name of each player that's played a match and the total amount of matches that they won. Right, we can do that. The name of each player that's played a match and the total amount of matches that they've won. So let's just kind of start. Let's build through this. So let's say, okay, well, I'm going to select distinct player number from matches and just see what that gives me. Right, and so this is one of the things that I kind of suggest that you do. Right, as we're kind of going through this, just start by building a small query and then add a little bit to it. And maybe I want to order by player number. See how that goes. Okay. So maybe I want to select distinct player number from matches. Maybe I also want to do, so maybe I want this to be select distinct matches dot player number players dot name from matches join players. And so if we're joining, we have to join it on something, right? So we're joining it on matches dot player number equals, so on matches dot player number equals players dot player number. Right, so now if we run this, we get everybody's name. Right, so we still have all the distinct players. And so let's try a sum of matches dot 1. So we'll try sum of matches dot 1 and just see what that does for us. That's gone a little awry. Didn't quite do what we wanted there. So let's think about this. Right? Because we want to get the number of matches won for each player. And we can do that. So in this case, what we need is we would need the group by function, right? You guys remember the group by function from a couple weeks ago? So we would need to, the way we were doing that would probably work, right? Sum matches dot one order by player number, group by player, or group space by player number. And I think in this case what I would also want to do is remove distinct, since we are grouping by player number. And I might want to also put order by last. There we go. Now we're getting somewhere. Now we are getting somewhere. All right, so matches.player number, players.name, sum matches.one. We can give that an alias as wins from matches, join players on matches.player number equals players.player number, group by player number, order by player number. So we have it ordered by player number, we have it grouped by player number. And so we could even check against what we have here. We have number 6 here, which is, I believe, Parmenter. 3, 6, 7, 8. Player number 6 here, Parmenter, has 8 wins. We could look here. Player number 2 has 1 win. Player number 8, 0 wins. Right, we can even do another one that is the total matches, right? So we can say, okay, so let's do another one of sum matches dot 1 plus sum matches dot lost. This should be over here, or we did that in the wrong place there for our alias. So sum matches.1 plus matches.loss. We give that as an alias for for number of matches. As total matches. And we can start to see how many things that we've done here, right? So we're using 2 players, or rather 2 tables. our players table and our matches table. We've joined it on the matches.player number equals players.player number. We have our number of wins here. We counted them, right? Because in our matches table here, they're broken out among individual games, or because these would be games, right? Like game, set, match. So this wouldn't be total matches. This would be total games. So we can change this here to be total games. Let's do one more thing that makes it even more interesting. Let's do one more. And let's use these that we've already done here. And let's get a win percentage. Right? Because if we took our sum of matches won, and we divided that by our sum of matches won plus sum of matches lost. Right, we could even go so far as, put these in parentheses here as win percentage and there's our win percentage that we're calculating here as well. Right, so that's even more complicated, right? Like we're able to take and calculate win percentage, and it's just going to update automatically based on just however many wins, however many game wins they have in the system or in the database. So let me just let's see. Let me dash space. Yeah. Forgot my MySQL comment there for a minute. I want to be able to save all of this for you all. I want to give you all these queries when we're done today. Let's do another sample query. Just looking at some notes over here for some ideas. So let's say I want to take each player, and let's look at those penalty amounts. Let's select star from penalties. Let's look at that. So let's say I want to take each player. I want to find their max penalty, and I want to find their lowest penalty. And I want to just subtract those from one another. And maybe I want to count their penalties too. So let's count their penalties and get the difference between their highest penalty and their lowest penalty. So we are going to select count payment number. Because remember, when we're counting, when we're going to get a count of penalties, we can count pretty much anything, right? When we were talking about aggregate functions last week, and when we were talking about counting as one of our aggregate functions, we said we could basically count anything. We are going to count, we can count anything. I actually think we want to do players dot name first, right? Just so we can get more practice doing that. We're going to count penalties dot payment number, and we are going to do the highest amount for that player subtracted by the lowest amount for that player, right? So now there is one thing here which is kind of interesting. And we don't really talk about that in reference to kind of what we do here. Because you could say, well, we want to try to make sure that, you know, there is a highest amount and a lowest amount, or whatever. But in this case, right, if the highest amount and the lowest amount are the same amount, then ideally, like on the output, it should be 0, right? Because highest amount and lowest amount, if that's the same amount, you subtract them both, right, then it's just 0. Right, so we use our max aggregate function, max penalties dot amount minus min penalties dot amount. We're going to do that from penalties. We're going to join players on player dot player number equals penalties dot player number. And we're going to group by penalties dot player number. Right? Remember, we're grouping by to get those unique. Since we have multiple players with multiple penalties here, we want to group by the player number to get the unique instances here. So we should be able to run this. And oh, we got an error. Oh, I just typoed there. Players dot player number. And there we go. All right, we see Parmenter, Moorman, and Newcastle all have 1 penalty. Right, and if we go back to our penalties table, we can look and we can see, okay, number 8, number 104, and number 6 all have 1 penalty. And if we looked back in our players table, we would see that those are our 6, right? Or those are our 3 people, right? Parmenter, Mormon, and Newcastle. Baker has 3. Collins has 2. We can see our 3 people that have only 1 penalty have a 0 here in this column, which is what they should have, right? Because their highest penalty and their lowest penalty amount is the same amount because they only have 1 penalty. Makes that pretty easy. So this we're going to say displays name, number of penalties, and max penalties minus min penalties. Now there are 2 more kind of tricky things, and I got time to show you one of them. I think in your module, and I'm just going to pull up your module really quickly just to make sure that it's in there. Yeah, there is a decent amount of information in your module about working with dates. You know, the big thing with dates in MySQL is that dates are just a little bit different, and that you kind of work with dates as a bit of a string instead of a, you know, dates are a special data type in MySQL. So if I wanted to say, you know, like what's a table that has dates? Like the penalties table here has dates. So if I wanted to select the payment date there, and I wanted to select, you know, anything that had a payment date that was after July 1st of 1982, right? I could say select star from penalties where payment date greater than 1982 07 01. And that's going to give us our resource there, right? And so if we were going to do something like get the payment numbers of the penalties incurred by players who were born after 1965, for example. So what we'd want to do is we would want to kind of do something similar here, but where we were focusing, right, it would be 1965, 12, 31, right? So where their birth date was after December 31st, 1965, I could even do that. We could even do that for you really quickly, just to see if anybody's watching. Right, that's one of your lab questions. To get the payment numbers of penalties incurred, so we're going to select penalties.payment number from penalties, join players on penalties dot player number equals players dot player number, where what is it, birth date, don't quite remember what the name of that column is, so let's Control X and let's select star from players, right? We've said we're going to do this whenever we're writing a new query, just so we can see. Okay, so it's birth underscore date, where birth date greater than 1965 12/31. And whoops, players.player number. It would help if I didn't make a typo. And there they are. It's just one person. It's just Parmenter. Or actually, I don't know why I said a name there. I don't know who number 4 is. If we run a select star from players, we can see it's the person with payment number 4. In penalties, we can see the person with payment number 4 is player number 104. And we can see player number 104 was born 5/10/1970. Brown here was born 8/17/71. But they don't have a penalty. So there's only one person that meets our qualifications there. I want to show you a union really quick. A union allows us to kind of take two select statements and put them together, and it returns the results of both of those. Or you know what? In the interest of time here, since we only have 5 minutes left, I'm just going to give you the hint of union. Union. If you get to a point where it seems like the only thing that you can do is use two queries to do a certain query, consider using a union. Look up a union, figure out what a union is, use a union instead of writing two queries. And so that's all that I have for you for today. This is where we'll stop. We'll turn the music back on, let the music play for a couple minutes while I answer questions in the chat if anybody here is with me live that has them. If you're watching the recording and you have questions, send me an email, send me a Teams message, whatever you've got. That's all that I have for you for today. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.